everything we possibly can to reverse biodiversity loss, and snaring is a really important part of the predator management toolkit. We've just seen severe restrictions placed on the use of using dogs to flush foxes from cover to then be shot. So that's one part of the toolbox pretty much gone, except under licence in very limited circumstances. If this goes as well, then you're left with pretty much one tool in the toolbox, which of course is the use of shooting, which is not always possible, nor practicable, nor safe. So our strongest view is that snaring should be retained. I think I disagree strongly with the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission on this, and it was regrettable that they did not seek to take more evidence. Certainly they didn't come to us to ask for evidence on our thoughts on this, which I think is a bit of a systematic failure, to be honest. But I think it would have been helpful if they did, because I think we've consulted widely with veterinary surgeons on this, and we've got a number of veterinary surgeons now that are endorsed the paper that Libby referred to, that's produced by GWCT, which supports humane cable restraints being retained. And we strongly hope that the Cabinet Secretary, when she does come to make a decision on this, will take that into account, because there are veterinarians out there who do think that snaring is an integral part of the predator management toolkit, without which we are severely compromising our ability to effectively reverse biodiversity loss. So as a component of the predator management toolkit, absolutely fundamental, and the retention of humane cable restraints in our view is fundamental.
Mike.
So I think what I'd refer to in terms of the rationale for this is broadly, I would say, set out in the policy memorandum. So paragraph 58 refers to the illegal use of traps on and around grouse moors and qualifies that with two references to incidents where raptors were persecuted using a spring trap. It then goes on to say where live capture traps have been used to persecute raptors, they are usually either ladder traps or funnel traps. So the inference that's being made in the policy memorandum is that traps are sometimes used to persecute raptors on grouse moors. The only thing I'd draw the attention committee to, really, in terms of the actual evidence base for this, is the official wildlife crime record, and you'll see from the latest record, which was published in this year and dates back to 2021 because of the lag, that trapping raptors, instances of birds of prey crime involving trapping, is consistently lower than it is, for example, for shooting or poisoning. So if you're looking at the actual scale of the issue, it is by far and away less than the issues associated with shooting and poisoning. And the other important thing to say, and we need to make this point really clear, is that wildlife crime record does not specify where these incidents have taken place. So we cannot say with certainty that those trapping incidents, for example, all happened exclusively in relation to grouse moors. So I think there is, I would say, a fairly weak evidence base, to be honest, for the introduction of further regulation on the use of certain wildlife traps in this context. And it's regrettable, I think, that the policy memorandum has not expanded on those in a little bit more detail. As I say, the fact that we're going to be talking about introducing a licensing scheme for numerous spring traps, the supporting evidence for which is summarised in two anecdotal references to raptor persecution, I think is largely deficient, and I think is something that probably needs to be clarified further by the Scottish Government.
Just on that, can I ask? Hugh Dignan, and
I think broadly, given the current provisions, I would say the answer is no, and that's not, I think, it's not through the Scottish Government's own fault, but I think there's been a lack of awareness about the potential unintended consequences of this. So let me just allow, if you may, Convener, just to set out the key problem, and it does relate to the imposition of unique licence numbers on traps that are used much more readily than, for example, traps that are used to catch live birds, which are the only traps at the moment that are currently subject to unique licence numbers. So the implication of putting unique licence numbers on all trapping infrastructure, including spring traps, essentially results in that trapping infrastructure becoming personalised. It is tied to a specific operator. Now, that shouldn't be a problem, but it is. And the reason that that's a problem is because of the extent of trap interference, tampering and sabotage in the Scottish countryside. And this committee has probably got the biggest wealth of evidence, actually, anywhere to suggest what the scale of this problem is, because in the call for views that you ran recently, a number of gamekeepers responded to that and made clear the kind of sort of incidents that they were faced with. And you'll actually see in your summary of the call for views, where you did your analysis, under the question, do you agree that there is a need for additional regulation of the use of certain wildlife traps? Those that disagreed, one of the key words that was used was sabotage. So it's clearly something that a lot of people spoke to in their responses to this committee. And the reason that's a problem is that if you've got a unique licence number that is tied to a trap, that trap has then been sabotaged, i.e. it's been made illegal through other ways and means, through the actions of a third party. That trap is then tying the illegally set operation to an individual. And that individual is much more likely, if there's a unique licence number there, to be the suspect in any investigation that then comes down the line. And of course, we know that under an investigation, in the context of this licensing scheme, you can have your personal licence to trap suspended. But moreover, the licence to shoot grouse as well could be suspended by the initiation of an official investigation. So you can see, I appreciate that was a lot of steps to go through, but the unintended consequence of personalising trap infrastructure, where there is rife kind of interference, sabotage and tampering with infrastructure in the Scottish countryside, has got unintended consequences, and I think it's just important we set through all three licensing schemes, and obviously the extent to which European Convention of Human Rights are engaged are highest in the context of the grouse shoot licence. However, the notion that a licence could be suspended, one, without the regulator being satisfied that a relevant offence has been committed, and that's what it says in statute, and two, on the basis of official investigation, you can understand why that provides certainly our members and indeed keepers on the ground with a great deal of concern, because ultimately, and I'm not saying that Nature Scott would necessarily behave in this way, but in statute they would be perfectly able to take away someone's licence if they were not satisfied that a relevant offence had been committed, provided an official investigation has been established. And just to give you a flavour of how easy it would be to establish an official investigation, all it would take is a phone call, to a police officer to say, I saw gamekeeper X on estate Y mis-setting or removing the tunnel off trap Z. That would be how easy it would be.
Says that Nature Scott doesn't have to be satisfied. Are you comfortable with that within the legislation?
Yep, we can work with that.
I'm sorry, but that just gives the regulator excessive discretionary power, right? And it does not provide us, our members, with adequate safeguards. It doesn't provide keepers with adequate safeguards. It basically means that, there's no burden of proof at all. You talk about the civil burden of proof. This constitutes no burden of proof because an official investigation can be triggered by a vexatious allegation very, very easily.
Thank you. Jim Feely and then Rachel Hamilton.
Yeah.
Second, your ability and the team that you manage, the ability to do this. But in statute, what is written in the legislation, you would have the power to suspend someone's licence if, on the basis of an official investigation being established and without you actually being satisfied a relevant offence being committed. So any right to appeal that follows for the practitioner thereafter is materially weakened by the fact that in legislation, the regulator does not need to be satisfied that a relevant offence is being committed, provided an official investigation is established. So to us, that's a systematic failure and leaves people wide open to vexatious allegations.
The gamekeepers are very worried about this suspicion.
An official investigation could be grounds for suspension, even if the regulator isn't satisfied a relevant offence has been committed. If, say for sake of argument, the SSPCA are given powers to investigate wildlife crime, then their initiation of an official investigation would then be cause for a licence to then potentially become suspended. And given our concerns over partiality, and given that Mike, great respect for Mike, but, did not address a lot of the kind of key points that I think the Police Scotland have rightly put on the record on this point, it's not something I think we can support. So, I've got, just personally some big questions over, the extent to which I suppose the SSPCA inspectors are vetted and trained compared to what police officers go through, because obviously there's rigorous vetting process and stuff, that are right and proper, and I don't feel perhaps that those processes are in place. But I'll pick up with Mike offline. I'll take up his offer on that, which is very helpful. But I think as an organisation, and just having spoken to numerous people on this topic now, literally gone around the country helping people with their consultations and hearing what they have to say, this is an issue that goes across the countryside, and it's not through our influence or anything like that. People have got misgivings for whatever reason about the Scottish SPCA being afforded enhanced powers to investigate wildlife crime because of things like what I just set out with respect to the licence suspension.
That's perfectly fine. You criticised earlier on that the Scottish...
Ross?
So just in response to that question from you, Ariane, I think I'd refer you to Police Scotland's response to your call for views that you ran, which noted that there may be some confusion as to which agency the public should report incidents to in relation to wildlife crime, which I think is a fair point. They also noted there was a tendency for them to instigate and commence police investigations without police involvement, and that this may ultimately hinder any subsequent police investigation/involvement. And they also questioned the ability of the SSPCA to properly look into some aspects of criminal investigations, including financial inquiries, CCTV work, and identifying links to serious and organised crime. The other point that they raised, which we would definitely endorse, is that investigations must remain impartial, and they have basically raised the concern that this could, the SSPCA's views on things like snaring, for example, could create conflicts of interest and call integrity and impartiality into question. And there's also some concerns here over compliance with things like RIPSA, the Scottish
Scottish crime reporting standards, Lord Advocate's guidance and codes of practice, and they also note that there probably have to be an overhaul of training processes and accountability for the Scottish SPCA. I think we've consulted widely with members on this point, and I think it's fair to say that there's a deficit of trust and confidence in the SSPCA's ability to investigate impartially, and that's supported by things that you see on social media, for example, from kind of official Twitter accounts associated with senior individuals, saying things like disgusting devices in reference to snares, which have no place in modern society. Without doubt, snares should be banned. Disgusting devices that have no place in this day and age. Any claim that snares are selective to only pest species is total nonsense. Even if they were pest species, can also suffer. And here we've got one that says, but after 30 years, still seeing the dreadful results of snaring. Why is this legal? Obviously, this otter was not legally snared, but as long as snares are allowed, such suffering will continue, pest or not. You can see why land managers have concern on seeing evidence like that when it comes to legal land management practices, the charity, which is being considered to have statutory powers, is holding partial views. And you can see why people might not feel comfortable or feel that the SSPCA could impartially investigate an incident involving wildlife.